You ever feel invisible at your own family's event? That's how it felt, hidden behind a pillar while my sister married the man she stole from me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Nora, and that day, I felt smaller than I ever had in my life. My sister Elise was glowing in her white gown, walking down the aisle with the man who once promised forever to me. I sat at the back of the hall, my seat hidden behind a large pillar. I wasn't in the family photos. I wasn't even listed in the program. It was as if I didn't exist. A year ago, Grant and I were planning our own wedding. We had been together for 3 years, and I believed he was my soulmate. Then I found out he had been seeing Elise behind my back. The betrayal shattered me. When I confronted them, Elise said coldly, "We didn't plan it, Nora. Love just happened." My parents told me to forgive, that I shouldn't ruin her happiness. So I left home and cut contact. When my mother called months later, begging me to attend the wedding for the family's sake, I almost said no, but some small part of me wanted closure. I wanted to prove to myself that I could face them and feel nothing. But as I sat there, watching Elise smile at Grant, I realized I still hurt. I tried to hold my head high, but my hands trembled. Then, out of nowhere, a man about my age sat beside me. He leaned close and whispered, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." I froze for a second, but something about his calm voice made me nod. His name was Cal. I didn't know him, but his confidence steadied me. For the first time that day, I felt seen. When it was time for speeches, Cal suddenly stood up. Everyone turned to look. Elise's smile faded. "I'd like to say something," he said, his voice firm. "I'm here as Nora's guest. She's been treated like she doesn't belong, but she's the kindest person I've ever met." The room went silent. Then he dropped the truth. He used to work with Grant and knew how Elise manipulated her way into his promotion and his life. Gasps filled the room. My father tried to interrupt, but Cal didn't stop. "You all should know what she did to her own sister to get here." I sat frozen, my heart racing. For the first time, every eye was on me, not with pity but with guilt. Elise's groom looked pale. She ran from the room, crying. Later, Cal helped me leave quietly. Outside, he said softly, "You didn't deserve that, Nora." I learned he was the brother of my late best friend, someone who had seen my pain and decided to help me reclaim my dignity. Weeks later, Elise's marriage fell apart. Grant lost his job, and my parents tried to reach out. I didn't answer. I had finally learned peace doesn't come from revenge. It comes from walking away stronger. That day behind the pillar, I was invisible. But now, I see myself clearly. Elise had always overshadowed me. Even as kids, she grabbed every chance to shine while I stayed in the background. Every accomplishment I celebrated, she somehow turned into a spotlight for herself. She took friendships, praise, and now, even the man I loved, Grant. I had trusted him completely, believed in the life we were building together. But one careless afternoon, I discovered their secret. Elise had been seeing him for months, sneaking messages, hiding meetings, and smiling at me as if nothing had changed. The betrayal hit harder than anything before. I confronted them, voice trembling, heartbreaking, but my parents didn't stand by me. They claimed, "Sometimes love can't be controlled. You'll understand one day." Their words felt like knives. I realized they valued appearances over honesty, protecting Elise while shoving me aside. That day, I made a decision. I left everything behind, my home, my grief, and any hope of being recognized as their daughter in that family. Months passed in silence. I avoided calls, ignored texts, and tried to rebuild my life in solitude. Then, one day, my mother reached out, voice cracking with guilt. She begged me to attend Elise's wedding, insisting it was for the family, that I should put the past behind me. Part of me wanted to refuse outright. I didn't want to face them, didn't want to watch Elise parade the life she stole from me. But another part, a small, stubborn piece of me, wondered if attending might finally let me witness the truth and perhaps reclaim some dignity. Reluctantly, I agreed. The thought of walking into that hall, knowing I would be surrounded by people who had chosen Elise over me, was unbearable. Yet I steeled myself. I would attend, but on my terms. I wouldn't beg for attention, I wouldn't seek validation, and I certainly wouldn't show weakness. This was my chance to confront the past without being consumed by it, to step into their world while keeping my strength intact. I couldn't predict what would happen that day. I only knew that Elise's history of taking what didn't belong to her had finally caught up, and I was ready to witness it unfold, without apology, without compromise, and without letting anyone erase me again. The stage was set. I just had to step into it, hold my head high, and wait for the moment when the scales would balance. That quiet storm of resentment I carried for months was about to meet the reality of the day Elise had planned so carefully, and I was no longer the sister she could overlook. The hall was buzzing with laughter and music, but I felt like I was standing outside it all. When I arrived, I followed the usher to my assigned seat and froze. A massive pillar loomed in front of me, blocking the view of the altar entirely. From that angle, I could barely see Elise as she glided down the aisle. Guests smiled, cameras flashed, and everyone seemed caught up in the moment, but not a single person spared me a glance. I watched as the bridesmaids walked past, their gowns shimmering, carrying bouquets I would never hold. My parents sat nearby, but didn't acknowledge me. It wasn't subtle. They had made sure I was tucked away, out of sight, almost like I didn't exist. No one mentioned me in the speeches, no one raised a toast, no one whispered a kind word. I could hear the cheer for Elise and Grant, but my name never left anyone's lips. Every smile, every clink of glasses, felt like a reminder of the space I had lost in their lives. The whispers around me were quick, almost fearful, as if anyone who looked at me too long might remind themselves of the awkward truth, of the sister they had ignored. I felt the weight of all those moments I had sacrificed for them, all those years of loyalty, love, and patience, and it pressed down on my chest. I wanted to stand up and leave, to escape the suffocating realization that I had allowed myself to be hurt by people who could dismiss me so easily. But something inside held me back, a stubborn flicker of defiance that whispered, "Sit there, see it all, and let them feel the consequence of underestimating." Tears threatened to spill, hot and unwelcome, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I clenched my fists in my lap, drawing strength from the bitter familiarity of being overlooked, ignored, and forgotten. Every passing moment behind that pillar, every silent glance that skipped me, reminded me of why I had to endure this scene. I wondered, not for the first time, why I had agreed to come. Was it guilt? A hope for reconciliation? Or simply the desire to witness the truth quietly unfold? Whatever it was, I realized that despite the cruelty of my seating, this hidden vantage point gave me something no one could take away. A clear view of the reality I had been denied for so long, and the chance to turn invisibility into quiet power. So I stayed, silent and observant, feeling like a ghost yet refusing to vanish completely. For the first time in years, I decided I would endure their disregard, not for them, but for the moment when it would matter most. I had almost decided to slip out quietly, to escape the suffocating tension and the sharp sting of being ignored, when someone settled into the vacant chair beside me. Startled, I turned slightly and saw a man around my age, with a calm demeanor and sharp, steady eyes that seemed to understand exactly what I was feeling. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet confidence about him, an ease that made the chaos around us feel almost irrelevant. He leaned close, just enough for me to hear him over the soft hum of the wedding music, and whispered, "Just follow my lead and pretend you're my date." I blinked at him, unsure if he was joking or speaking seriously. My mind raced. Who was he? How did he even notice me in this mess? Yet, something about the way he spoke made the thought of leaving seem impossible. I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. There was no time to overthink it. The intensity of his gaze held me steady, gave me courage I hadn't felt all day. In that single gesture, I felt a spark of hope, as if the invisible walls that had been pressing down on me were suddenly pierced by someone who refused to ignore my presence. The energy in the room shifted subtly. The chatter and laughter still swirled around us, but now there was an undercurrent of anticipation, almost magnetic. I felt it immediately. The moment had changed. I was no longer just a hidden figure behind a pillar, quietly enduring the humiliation. With him there, beside me, it was as if the world had recalibrated, and I might actually be noticed. For the first time all day, my shoulders relaxed slightly. I straightened my posture and let the faintest hint of a smile form, though I didn't fully trust it yet. He didn't push, didn't speak further, but his presence alone was enough. That quiet assertion, the certainty in his stance, and the subtle command in his words made me realize something important. I wasn't powerless here, not entirely. As I watched him, I felt a surge of curiosity mixed with relief. Who was this stranger? How did he know what I needed? And why did it feel like he had arrived just when the moment demanded it most? My heart pounded with a mix of fear and anticipation, but the seed of something new, a potential ally, perhaps even justice, had been planted. I nodded again, committing fully to his suggestion, and the air seemed to shift around us. The oppressive weight of invisibility lifted slightly, replaced by the thrilling uncertainty of what was about to unfold. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel small. I felt like someone might finally see me, not the sister they overlooked, but the woman they had underestimated. The room hummed with polite chatter as the wedding speeches began, but I barely noticed. My attention was still tangled in the bitterness of being ignored. Then, unexpectedly, Cal rose from his seat. Heads turned, whispers spread, and a sudden hush fell over the crowd. Elise's radiant smile wavered for the first time that evening. He didn't step toward the podium or announce himself with ceremony. Instead, he simply spoke, his voice carrying through the hall with a steady clarity that demanded attention. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "I'm here as a friend of Nora, the bride's sister. And tonight, I want to honor her." A ripple of confusion passed through the guests. Eyes darted toward me, unsure whether to be offended or intrigued. Cal continued, describing me in ways I had never expected anyone to. He spoke of the quiet strength I had shown despite constant disappointment, the kindness I had extended even when it was unreciprocated, and the resilience that had carried me through betrayal. The words washed over me, impossible and surreal. I could feel my heart accelerating, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and cautious hope flooding through me. All around me, people froze, unsure of how to respond. Elise's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. She glanced at him, then at me, her expression shifting from surprise to discomfort. Cal raised his glass, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. "Here's to Nora," he said simply, with no mention of the bride or groom. "To a woman who deserves to be seen, acknowledged, and celebrated, not overlooked." Murmurs spread through the audience. Some whispered nervously, others stared openly, caught between admiration and shock. I could feel the weight of every judgmental gaze turning in my direction, no longer dismissive, no longer invisible. For the first time in years, I existed in the eyes of my family and their guests, not as the sister who had been betrayed, but as a person worthy of recognition and respect. I glanced at Cal. He didn't smile, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes that anchored. I felt a surge of empowerment I hadn't known I could feel so publicly. The toast had shifted everything, the power balance, the narrative, the room itself. I had been silent, unnoticed, and minimized for too long. Now, with him standing beside me and speaking for me, the room recognized a truth it had ignored. And in that sudden, unexpected spotlight, I realized that the moment I had dreaded, the day of my sister's wedding, was becoming the very moment I reclaimed myself. A hush settled over the hall, heavier than before, as Cal's voice cut through the murmurs. He didn't hesitate or stumble. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, speaking with deliberate precision. "I've worked with Grant," he began, and every ear strained to hear. "I know the truth about how he ended up with Elise." Gasps and startled whispers rippled through the crowd. I could feel my pulse quicken, a mix of fear and anticipation tightening my chest. Cal's words were calm, but the weight behind them was undeniable. He outlined, without embellishment, the schemes Elise had orchestrated behind closed doors, how she manipulated conversations, spread subtle rumors, and quietly undermined anyone who stood between her and what she wanted. He didn't just speak of career ambitions. He spoke of emotions, of how she maneuvered Grant into believing she was his perfect partner, while simultaneously isolating me, ensuring I was too shocked and heartbroken to interfere. Each revelation landed like a sharp stone in the quiet room. Faces drained of color. People shifted uneasily in their seats. Elise's posture stiffened. Her carefully curated image of composure began to crack, a flicker of panic crossing her features. I felt a strange mix of vindication and disbelief. All the pieces of the past year, the stolen moments, the whispered lies, the cruel silences, suddenly fit together with precision. For the first time, someone was speaking the truth aloud, giving voice to the injustice I had endured. The silence was almost suffocating, punctuated only by the occasional intake of breath or a whispered, "I can't believe this." Cal continued, laying bare the subtle ways Elise had isolated me, painting a picture of emotional manipulation so meticulous that it left the room stunned. My parents exchanged guilty glances, their eyes wide with the realization of what they had ignored for so long. I sat frozen, watching the narrative shift before. The woman who had always seemed untouchable, flawless in her social grace and charm, was suddenly vulnerable. Her perfect world was faltering, piece by piece, in front of everyone. Cal's final words hit like a hammer. Nora didn't deserve any of this. She was pushed aside so Elise could take what wasn't hers. It's time that truth is known. The room remained silent, tension thick enough to taste. Elise's smile had completely vanished. She looked around, searching for some lifeline, but the faces she once controlled now reflected shock, doubt, and disapproval. I realized in that moment that the power had shifted. No one could hide the truth anymore, and I finally could breathe. The moment Cal finished speaking, a wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Voices rose in shocked disbelief, slicing through the previously controlled elegance of the ceremony. My father's face had gone pale, his jaw tight. He stepped forward, his tone sharp. "That's enough. Stop this immediately." Cal didn't flinch. He looked directly at him, unwavering. "Sometimes the truth needs an audience," he said, his voice steady, deliberate. The words hung in the air, heavier than any reprimand could be. I could feel the energy shift around me. For the first time, everyone's attention was fully on me, and it wasn't sympathy they offered. It was guilt, a sudden, uncomfortable awareness of everything they had ignored. My mother's eyes dropped to the floor. I caught the trembling of her hands, the shame radiating from her posture. She had begged me to attend this day, hoping for reconciliation. But now she could no longer hide from the consequences of her partiality, the favor she had shown Elise so blatantly. The weight of her regret was palpable, and I realized how far she had allowed herself to be complicit in my erasure. Elise's groom, Grant, looked as though the floor might open beneath him. His confident, polished expression crumbled into disbelief and confusion. The carefully crafted facade of their perfect union faltered, and I could see the cracks widening in real time. It was surreal. Everyone I had feared, everyone who had minimized me for so long, was now confronted with the reality they had helped create. A strange mix of fear and liberation coursed through me. My chest tightened with nervousness, but beneath it was a pulse of exhilaration. For years, I had been silenced, ignored, and dismissed, but now the room was acknowledging my existence, my truth. Not with kindness, not with consolation, but with the raw, undeniable awareness of what had been done to me. I lifted my chin slightly, feeling a rush of clarity. I didn't need to speak. Their reactions spoke volume. Their whispered speculations, their furtive glances, and the faltering confidence of those who had celebrated Elise's perfection all served as proof. I was no longer invisible. I had been underestimated, but their discomfort was evidence that my presence, my story, finally mattered. As I met Cal's steady gaze, I felt a profound sense of solidarity. He hadn't just spoken for me, he had shifted the balance in the room. My father's outrage, my mother's shame, Elise's panic, Grant's astonishment, they were all part of a reckoning that I had silently endured for too long. And at that moment, for the first time, I felt the satisfaction of being recognized, not for who they wanted me to be, but for who I truly was. The hall was in disarray. Elise bolted from the room, her train of silk flaring behind her, tears streaming down her face. Grant hesitated for a moment, then rushed after her, calling her name, but she ignored him. Conversations stopped abruptly, and the guests shuffled uneasily, exchanging glances and whispers that carried across the room like wildfire. The elegant atmosphere had crumbled, leaving only tension and stunned silence in its wake. I remained seated for a heartbeat longer, processing the sudden shift. My body trembled, part adrenaline, part relief. Then Cal leaned toward me, draping his jacket over my shoulders with a casual authority that felt grounding. The warmth of it, both literal and figurative, steadied me. I turned toward him, startled, searching for a hint of explanation. "I thank you," I managed, my voice barely more than a whisper, quivering despite my best effort to hold it steady. My eyes followed him as he offered a small, knowing nod, the kind that said he understood the storm I had been enduring long before this evening. It took a moment for the realization to settle in. Cal wasn't a random stranger. He had been there intentionally, carefully, ensuring that someone would speak the truths I had carried alone for months. Then it hit me. He was the brother of my late best friend. I remembered the stories she had told me, the small, fleeting mentions of her brother's empathy and insight, and now I understood. He had observed my pain from afar, witnessed the betrayal I had suffered, and quietly orchestrated a moment that allowed me to reclaim my presence. The chaotic noise of the hall became background to my thoughts. I drew a slow, steadying breath, feeling the reality of the evening settle in. Elise's tears, Grant's confusion, the disoriented guests. All of it was the natural fallout of honesty finally surfacing. I realized that, in the midst of destruction, there was clarity. My role had shifted from the overlooked sister to someone who had been quietly vindicated. Cal walked beside me as we exited, his presence calm and unwavering. The jacket around my shoulders was heavier than its fabric. It carried the weight of understanding, protection, and quiet triumph. I glanced at him once more, grateful in a way that words could not fully capture. For the first time that night, I felt unburdened. The betrayal, the marginalization, the humiliation, all of it had been witnessed. I was no longer alone, no longer invisible. And as the door closed behind us, leaving the chaos behind, I understood that this moment marked not only the end of one chapter, but the beginning of a life where I would finally be acknowledged, truly seen, and quietly celebrated. Weeks passed in a blur of calm and reflection. The chaos of the wedding faded, but the consequences of that night rippled quietly. Elise's marriage, built on lies and manipulation, began to unravel. Grant grew distant, disillusioned by her schemes, and their perfect facade crumbled under the weight of truth. The elegance she once carried with ease was replaced by tension and regret, visible in every stiff movement and forced smile. Soon after, news came that shook the family further. The company where Grant worked had uncovered Elise's underhanded tactics, spreading false rumors, exaggerating accomplishments, and subtly sabotaging colleagues to secure her own advantage. The result was inevitable. She was dismissed, stripped of the prestige and authority she had clawed toward with relentless ambition. In the quiet of my apartment, I allowed myself to feel a sense of vindication. I did not celebrate her downfall with glee. There was no need, but a serene satisfaction settled in my chest. The universe, it seemed, had found its balance. No speeches, no confrontations. The consequences unfolded naturally, without my direct involvement. My parents reached out, hesitant and cautious, their messages laced with guilt and attempts at reconciliation. I read them once, feeling a mixture of sadness and detachment, then set the phone aside. Their apologies could not erase the years of neglect, favoritism, and disregard. I realized that forgiveness might come someday, but not yet, not while I was still reclaiming my own life. I began to focus on myself. I took small steps, new routines, new friendships, opportunities that reflected my passions rather than my family's expectations. I discovered the joy of making choices solely for me, and with each decision, I felt lighter, freer. The weight of resentment gradually lifted, replaced by a quiet pride in my independence. There was a subtle power in this calm revenge. I did not need to humiliate anyone publicly. I did not need to orchestrate drama. The natural outcomes of truth, combined with my refusal to bend or beg, had spoken louder than any confrontation could have. Elise's failures and the discomfort of those who had ignored me were sufficient. In this newfound space, I could finally breathe. My life was no longer defined by betrayal or by anyone else's manipulation. I was constructing something lasting and real, a version of myself unshaken by deceit, untethered from favoritism, and unafraid of what others thought. For the first time in years, I felt a profound sense of liberation. Strength had replaced pain, clarity had replaced confusion, and freedom had replaced helplessness. I was finally building my life on my own terms, and for the first time, I believed that nothing and no one could steal that from me. Months passed in a quiet rhythm, the chaos of the wedding and its aftermath fading into memory. Life had settled into a gentle pattern, and I found myself thinking less about the betrayals and more about the small victories I had earned in solitude. Then, unexpectedly, I heard from Cal. His message was simple, yet it carried the weight of understanding and reassurance. We met at a small cafe, sunlight filtering softly through the windows. He greeted me with a calm smile, the same steady presence that had appeared beside me on the wedding day. We talked casually at first, sharing small updates and laughter, but beneath it all, there was a profound acknowledgement of what had transpired months ago. Finally, he looked at me and said quietly, "You deserve to be seen." The words struck a chord deep within me. I realized that all the humiliation, the whispered exclusions, and the long months of silence had not broken me. They had shaped me. I smiled, a real, unguarded smile that had nothing to do with anyone else's validation. In that moment, I understood that my triumph was not loud or public. It had not come from confrontations or displays of revenge. Instead, it had emerged quietly through endurance, awareness, and the courage to claim my own worth. The subtle shift in attention at the wedding had been only the beginning. True victory had been the reclamation of my own life. I reflected on that day behind the pillar, the hidden vantage point that had initially felt like a prison. In the stillness of that position, I had observed, endured, and gathered strength. It was there, in silence and invisibility, that I had begun to see myself clearly again, separate from Elise's shadow and the family's favoritism. Now, months later, I recognized that healing had less to do with the downfall of others and more to do with the rebuilding of my own spirit. The quiet pride I felt, the inner resilience that had grown, and the newfound clarity of my desires were far more satisfying than any external acknowledgement could ever be. Cal's presence reminded me that sometimes support comes from unexpected places, that validation can appear without judgment, and that witnessing someone's growth can be as rewarding as experiencing it firsthand. As I left the cafe, a sense of completeness settled over me. My heart felt lighter, my mind steadier, and my spirit unshaken. I had survived betrayal, reclaimed my strength, and discovered peace in the very shadows where I once felt invisible. For the first time in years, I knew that being truly seen began not with others, but with myself. And in that realization, I finally felt whole. Do you think I handled my sister and family the right way by standing my ground, or should I have tried to forgive them? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this.